therapy, if you like, is a process in which we have to be so careful that we don't misrecognize the other moment by moment. You know, people like Rogers and others write about moment by moment, that we are curious, we are open, we are in dialogue, so that the work is dynamic, including some of the research we've done outside in nature to see what that's like, to think about power. So embodied trauma and what it means transculturally, cross-culturally, it's the first point, and our openness to that and what's emerging from the research. And the second point is how we might decolonize practice to avoid misrecognition of other.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here with Divine Charura and John McLeod, two colleagues whose work I've admired and enjoyed for a long, long time. So thank you both for making some time early on a Wednesday morning to come and talk about the keynote at the conference. So really appreciate that you both will be getting us going at the conference. It's always a big job to get us warmed up and getting us started. So thank you for that, and really appreciate a bit of thinking this morning about that. I wanted to begin by asking you to maybe say a little bit about why you're doing the keynote, I guess, is the kind of the short version of the question. But what is it that you feel like we need to keep our eye on as colleagues and as a field? I mean, the trauma part of the helping professions has become huge. And there's some things that we need to be looking at and making sure that we're thoughtful about. Is that a place that we could start?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
John, would you like to start us off kindly?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I agree that kind of trauma has increasingly become a kind of a very kind of important and significant topic in practice and research. And I suppose I was interested in this keynote. I mean, partly because I, as a therapist or researcher, I haven't worked that much with trauma, so I'm keen to learn more about trauma. And I've found Divine's work and his work with his colleagues around embodied trauma enormously useful, and I kind of thought that it might be a useful way to start a conference by having a dialogue between Divine and myself around kind of, look, what's the implications for pluralistic practice, or what does a kind of pluralistic perspective help you to appreciate in Divine's work? So, and I think that then is, I think that kind of exercise or activity, I think, lies at the heart of pluralistic practice and the pluralistic framework for practice, because, in principle, any kind of knowledge is relevant to a pluralistic way of working. So then it's a matter of, well, how do we engage with that knowledge? So Divine's papers probably, I don't know if I'm absolutely correct here, but probably do not include the word pluralism, right? No. So it's like if anybody was to say, well, all these studies of embodied trauma by the Charura group you know, what do they mean for pluralistic practice? If you just did a search through them all using the word pluralism, you would find nothing. So kind of how do we kind of access the pluralistic meaning and themes within it? And just the final thing I want to say is I think one of the really I just think wonderful things about the Pluralistic Conference down the years, it has been this great openness and kind of willingness to dialogue and people participating in the conference. Because there's all sorts of ways of understanding pluralism and pluralistic therapy, but the kind of common ground across all that is this willingness to look at other perspectives, that there isn't a single truth. And I thought this might be, since that's really the basis of how Divine and I have been working, this might get the conference off to a good start. So I don't know, that's a rather wordy answer, but these were some of the influences for me in wanting to be involved in this.
Thank you, John. Thank you for describing that. And Divine, can we come to you then?
Yeah, well, thanks, John, for what you've just said, and thanks, John Wilson, for the invitation this morning. Yes, I'll say three quick things. The first is the appreciation that I've got for the huge bodies of work on trauma over the last few decades. There's a lot of work and research, cutting-edge research that's going on. I feel like with colleagues at York St. John and Manchester Uni and other universities in the US and so on that I collaborate with, we really are standing on the shoulders of giants. So there's huge bodies of work and references to that. And I think it's important for me, for us as practitioners, to engage with both the evidence that's emerging out of research, but also what we're noticing in our practice. So that's the first thing. There's also a huge body of work that John and Mick and others have championed and been at the forefront of in relation to pluralistic practice. And the second thing that leads on from that then is a lot of my work in terms of research is with populations that experience and live with trauma. For example, refugees, asylum seekers, and those who are seeking sanctuary. And in the world today, with the different wars, displacement because of climate change, conflicts in many places, it is so important that we have a transcultural understanding and conceptualization of trauma. That then comes into the third bit, which is about decolonization. So our talk is a dialogue between decolonizing and pluralistic perspectives. And I've been very interested in what decolonizing means, which essentially is about undoing coloniality and challenging systems that maintain oppression and subjugation of those who are on the margins. And it's about power. And so how can we as therapists hold power with rather than power over in our practice? What methods can we use that authentically speak to this? So that's been so important. And in order to do that, I think it requires dialogue. So one of the things we've done with John is the dialogue we'll have at the conference is not the first time we will dialogue. For the last 6 months, maybe more, because we started the conversations last year, we've been meeting every month, maybe sometimes a couple of months, to talk through our experiences, and what will be presented are threads and themes from some of this dialogue between decolonizing perspectives and pluralistic perspectives. So those are the things that I wanted to start to share.
Thank you, Divine. Wow, it's incredible to think about how much time and energy has gone into this keynote already. It's exciting to then think about what will emerge during the conference. I'm thinking about, as colleagues are coming along to the conference, whether they're is something, or something you might say just now, because we've got the literature and the research, and we're going to be engaged in that as part of the discussion. And there's going to be some briefing papers that we're sharing with colleagues as well. So if you're watching this video, there should be a link somewhere close by to pick up those papers and read through. I mean, see if you feel this is like a helpful question for now. And I'm thinking about what we might be missing in practice, sitting with our clients, and like how these conversations can help us to do better with our clients, or what we might not even know we're missing, something like that. Could that be something we take a few minutes on this morning? Or,
Hmm. Yeah, can I speak to that
Please,
briefly?
John.
Yeah, I think I mean, I think that there's lots of ways that that I've, lots of things I've learned from Divine and from reading his work that are that actually make a difference in the counselling room. I think that so I mean at the keynote we're going to be talking about some of the studies from Divine's group into kind of interviews with people who've been displaced, and interviews with people, I think particularly refugees who've had therapy, and interviews with therapists. Yeah. And I think, I mean, a minute or two ago, Divine referred to this kind of enormous body of work, globally into trauma and how much that's offered us. And so anyway, I think one of the aspects of that of the what we're going to be talking about in the conference that's of practical utility is that it takes trauma. So trauma is like a diagnostic term. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a kind of diagnosis and is measured in studies and clinical assessments and things like that. And and I know this is from very much pluralistic perspective, but these studies pluralize it. They start to kind of pull it apart and kind of allow us as helpers and therapists to kind of see different things or do different things. So shall I give you a couple of examples of that?
That'll be great, John.
Yeah.
yes,
So,
please, John.
so I think one of the I've got a sense is perhaps one of the earlier studies was interviews with clients, and it kind of asks them what are the issues for them, right? So these are all people who would be diagnosed with trauma, and but then they are talking about kind of different areas of their life, relationships, making sense of what they've lost and their memories, building a new life for the future. Yeah. So this is actually kind of what it means if we can kind of step out of this expert position of kind of knowing, what trauma is, and possibly using a therapy protocol for some type of therapy. If we step outside that, and actually listen to what clients are saying, and help them to say it, of course, right? That study, I think, is a tremendous help in sensitizing us to what the clients might have to say, right?
Thank you.
And then just another small, but I think just tremendous example in the research studies, but I think it's got a lot of implications for working therapeutically with people. So in at least a couple of these research studies that were interviewing people, not just therapy clients, but kind of people who'd been refugees and displaced and so forth, without necessarily, having had therapy. And so it's like, how do you help people to kind of, how do you engage with their own reality and the meaning of it all for them? So what Divine and his colleagues did was ask them to bring in an object, right? And I read this and I thought, well, yeah, okay, like we've all been doing this for years, haven't we? This is one of the great therapy trainers moves is, to ask members of a group to bring in an object and things like that. But actually in these studies, what you then have is a kind of a reflection and analysis on what this means to bring in an object, and the how the talking about the object helps people to to kind of invite the interviewer or potentially the therapist into their world. And there's this sort of shared thing that, it could be a kind of a copy of a book or a photograph or a, musical instrument or all sorts of things that has many stories attached to it for that person. And then a really kind of lovely kind of reflection analysis on how that plays out in the interaction between the interviewer and the participant. So I think these are a couple of quite important things.
Thank you, John.
And there's many more. Yeah.
Really appreciate that connection to practice. Yeah. Divine, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, it's just so wonderful to be listening. Okay, let me say two quick points. The first is that most colleagues who will be watching this video and who will attend the conference and watch the video afterwards, when we say about the relationship between power and their practice, most people, good enough therapists, will say, well, absolutely. The issue of power in therapy has to be explored, critiqued, and negotiated. What we have found through the research in then asking therapists, for example, who work with refugees, asylum seekers, sanctuary seekers who've been tortured, for example, from all different orientations, psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, cognitive behavioral, humanistic, existential, and so on, they realized that the level of trauma and work they began to engage in really challenged them to begin to question the theoretical orientations they were trained in, what they knew, and a realization of the complexity of working with embodied trauma. So you say embodied trauma, most people, yeah, it's trauma in the body. But what might be outside the sentence of what we usually are in awareness of is that across different cultures, there are different conceptualizations. So your DSM might say, look for these, or your international classification, if you're working with a diagnostic system, or if you are open to other perspectives and non-pathologizing perspectives, you would still have a conceptualization in your mind. For example, clients who are coming from countries or heritages that are African, Afro-Caribbean, spoke about, I feel like my head is hot and there's termites in my head. That's clients who were of Islamic faith spoke about the nafs in their body, and so on and so forth. So it is so important that we are curious, we are open, and we decenter psychotherapy to critique and to be open to this diversity of presentations that clients bring. Then the second point is about colonization and what me and John have been talking about, which is misrecognition. Heidegger spoke about, the philosopher Heidegger spoke about misrecognition, but I bring it from an African psychology perspective, which is I am because we are. And that as human beings, we're in a process of constantly being, becoming. So John Wilson I met and John McLeod I met 15 minutes ago have already moved on. Right? They're in process. So therapy, if you like, is a process in which we have to be so careful that we don't misrecognize the other moment by moment. You know, people like Rogers and others write about moment by moment, that we are curious, we are open, we are in dialogue, so that the work is dynamic, including some of the research we've done outside in nature to see what that's like, to think about power. So embodied trauma and what it means transculturally, cross-culturally, it's the first point, and our openness to that and what's emerging from the research. And the second point is how we might decolonize practice to avoid misrecognition of other. So those would be my points that I'd say are important for us to be in consideration of.
Thank you, Divine.
Thank you
so much. And here we are at the end of the time that we have for our discussion. It feels almost impossible to stop. I want to kind of hang out with you both for the rest of the day and just begin to open up these topics. But we are going to pause, and then we'll be back together for the conference. And I hope that colleagues who watch this video have the same experience. Will come along, join us at the conference, watch the recording later. So yeah. Divine, John, thank you so much for taking this time today. I really appreciate it, and just feel so excited for the keynote when it comes. Thank you both.
Thank you, John. I look forward to it, and look forward to having the dialogue with John as well, and to meeting so many colleagues, and to start dialogue going amongst different communities. That's our aim. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you both.